Hello, my name is Autumn Brown, and I'm a researcher with Oklahoma State's Oklahoma Oral History Research Project. For our Activism and Education and the Civil Rights Movement Oral History Project, today, March 4th, 2020, I am meeting with Dr. Tonnia Anderson to discuss her experiences with school desegregation in Oklahoma City. Dr. Anderson, thank you so much for talking with me today. Let's just begin by telling me a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? What was your family like? Tell me about yourself.
Okay. I was born in Guthrie, Oklahoma. My parents were cattle ranchers, still are cattle ranchers, and they have engaged in a number of entrepreneurial activities in construction, rodeo. They broke a number of racial barriers in being some of the first African American stock contractors in different rodeo associations. So I came up in an environment of business / farming people.
Okay. And what was it like growing up in Guthrie?
Well, where I actually grew up was not in Guthrie, but in southern Logan County, in a rural area that's kind of equidistant between Edmond and Guthrie. And it was wonderful. I had hundreds of acres to roam around in as a child, and just explore nature. Yeah. Play with animals.
Fun.
So forth.
That's a lot of acres to run around on.
Yeah. I didn't think so at the time, but in looking back, it was wonderful for me. We were one of the only Black families in that area, but when I was growing up, it was not densely populated. Now it is, but at that time it was not.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like being the only Black family in that area?
It was interesting. When I was very small, my parents experienced a lot of racism. The way that we were situated. My parents lived, let's say at one point, my great-grandmother lived next door, and then down the hill, my grandparents. So essentially, they had control of a mile section of land. In the late 60s and early 70s, we started to have an influx of more white families moving in, on very small tracts of land. And so during that time, they would shoot my family's animals, cut the fences. Our house was destroyed. And, so in terms of different degrees of racial violence, we experienced it.
Wow. So you've already kind of described your community. Well, can you kind of further describe how that community changed? So you talked about the fact that it was you, your grandparents that controlled this mile of land. So over time, more white families started to move in. Mm-hmm. Can you describe how that changed your community and kind of your upbringing, your experiences within living in that community?
Well, I will. And to do so, I would need to backtrack.
Okay.
Because prior to my existence, but during the early part of the 20th century, that area, again, it was still sparsely populated, but it was mixed. So you had more black families who lived there at that time. You had a few white families that lived at that time, as well as some Native Americans. And so during the early part of the 20th century, in terms of education, there was one school and everybody attended that school. White students, really it was designed for blacks and the few Native Americans. But with the white families, they too sent their children to the school. So while segregation was going on with a flare, you had integration there. The area was also, I'll say, colorful because the soil was sorry. Okay, a lot of clay, red clay there. So people didn't farm so much, they made whiskey. Mm-hmm. So during Prohibition, blacks and whites, and I will say my family included, they made whiskey. And you had a lot of interaction, later on in the very early 50s. My grandparents were the first to have a phone in the area and a television. And so every Saturday you would have people in the community congregating at my grandparents' home, watching television. And, my grandfather, he had wolfhounds. So his friends were primarily certainly the blacks and whites in the area. That changed really with the rise of the civil rights movement and as more people started coming in the 60s, So those traditional bonds and so forth, they broke down. Not amongst the old timers, but with the new ones. And it was that cadre that did what they did, with my parents. And, even after my grandfather died, there was a group of, I'll say, would-be Klansmen. And most of them had come from the Arkansas area that settled there. And one night in the middle of the night, my grandmother heard this noise. Now, their house was a 2-story house. And after my grandfather died, that's where she slept. So she looked out of the window that was facing the street and saw all of these cars, on her lawn and calling her out. They broke a window and then, yelled, "Okay, are you awake now? In." Wow. And so, when my grandmother saw that, she quietly told me to get her rifle. My grandmother could shoot. So I went downstairs, got her rifle and some shells. And, she leveled her bead, as she called it, on the lead dude. And she knew who he was and called him out because she recognized his voice. Mm-hmm. But the point was, this guy told her, that it was time for her to leave because, the white people in the area, they didn't want to live around any ends, right? So my grandmother, this widowed woman, I guess they perceived was a vulnerable target. And of course, she owned 160 acres herself. And, her basic, her response, which was funny, is that she shot. And my grandmother, if she had been a man and given the era that she came up in, she would have been a sharpshooter. The bullet hit right between the guy's feet, and the dirt covered his shoes. And she told him, she said, the next shot, somebody's not going home, ever. So you better get off of my yard.
Oh, man.
You had people scrambling around like scalded dogs. And so they didn't bother her anymore. And, and when she told my parents about it, my dad called this guy up and told him that, you better leave Opal alone. Mm-hmm. And this was in the 70s.
Wow, I'm thinking you would say like the 30s, 40s.
No, I mean in the 30s and 40s, it was harmonious. But it was after you had this new transition of people moving in from other places that did not have those roots there.
How old were you? Do you remember when this happened?
I was 10.
How did this feel? Like, how did it make you feel seeing all this?
Number one, it was initially traumatic, and then number two, with my grandmother's response, it made me proud. I'll admit that. And her response, though, was not uncharacteristic of her, because for me, I grew up with her telling stories about, just racial affairs, racial events, especially in the Deep South, and and the challenges that they faced when she was a child, and stuff. Not in this particular area, but in an area west of theirs, a little tiny community called Seward, Oklahoma. It's virtually a ghost town now. But, after the land run, it became a little thriving community that was not just biracial, but very, very diverse, with blacks and whites, Asians, and Mexicans, but you had a little clan there, and so I think in large part because of the diversity and the type of blacks who settled, you had those who were middle class, landowners, and that was a different milieu than, the stereotype of the poor black sharecropper and, acquiescent and this, that. And so because you had, I think, a black middle class there, that it heightened racial tensions.
Your grandma was brave.
She was. I mean, and it was interesting because she was biracial. Her mother was a white woman. So it's, when we talk about, race and race relations, we tend to think of these absolute divides and this, that. And in my own family, that was not the case, but things changed, once we hit the 20th century, and white supremacy became, I would say, a national ideology based on the Southern model.
Why do you think a black middle class causes such racial tension?
That's a good question. From my research, as well as personal experiences, it does so, I think, because of how race has been historically used um, race has been, blackness has been used, or whiteness, depending upon what you're looking at, has been used as this divide. You know, when we talk about segregation, Jim Crow segregation, it creates a glass ceiling. So that no matter, let's say, if you're on the white side of the spectrum, no matter how poor you are, no matter how uneducated you are, it provides a sense of cultural capital that solely revolves around race and racial standing. So when you have a black middle class, the mere existence challenges, and I think deconstructs this little glass ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
That all it is a construction.
Mm-hmm. Complete social construction. Wow. So what schools did you attend?
Well, I graduated from Guthrie High School. And from there, I received scholarships to USAO, University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma. And I stayed here 2 years, went to Europe, came back, and finished my degree at Northern Illinois University in Dekalb. Then I started graduate work at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, because my undergraduate background actually was in art. It was in painting. However, I had a long-standing hobby of doing historical research, into Black life, culture. At the Art Institute, I went to study with an African American painter at Yale just for the summer, and got hooked up with some African American historians at Yale, and I shared with them my hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, I was offered a deal I could not refuse. So I started at Yale in African American Studies, working on my master's. And then from there, I completed my PhD at Yale in American Studies, emphasis on 19th and early 20th century Black visual culture.
And during your time through secondary and post-secondary schools, what was going on in the larger context? So were schools desegregating? Were schools still segregated? Like, what was that like for you, matriculating through those school systems?
Well, for me, I think my cohort, because I started the first grade in 1970. And I believe my cohort was the first to experience integration, district-wide integration. So I did not go through a segregated system. In coming here, it was actually more diverse in the 80s than it is now here at USAO.
Really?
Yes. It was very diverse. The problems that would occur in the 80s and with the Middle East and all of this stuff had not really had major effect on students from the Middle East, because we used to have a lot of students from the Middle East. Iran, Jordan, a few from Saudi Arabia, a lot of students from Africa, and not athletes. We had a lot of students from different states, more so than what we have now. So, and a very large Native American student population here. So it's interesting, because you could, with at any time, if you walked around campus, you were immediately introduced to people from different places across the world and cultures and this, that. And over time that changed.
Yeah.
At Northern was very different for me because it was much more homogenous. When I first arrived, settled into the dorm, the first thing that my new roommate indicated is that she had never seen a real living Black person before. And so I'm like, what? And I think at that time, Northern had 26,000 students. There were 300 Black people.
What year was this?
That was in, I arrived there in 1985.
Okay.
And stuff. So it was very interesting. And it became more interesting that first year of Black Heritage Month, in February of my first year there. I was asked to do a little mural thing, temporary mural thing, celebrating Black History Month at my dorm. And after I finished it, then I went someplace, grabbed a pizza or whatever and hung out with some friends. When I came back, my roommate, she was just pale and visibly shaken. And I'm like, what's up with you? And she said, all day long, you've received death threats. And I'm like, get out. She said, no. So then with me being there, the phone was just ringing off the hook. So that was the environment.
And you were receiving death threats simply for putting on a Black History program?
Oh, just for painting this temporary mural thing on the windows. The dorm on the first floor, it had very large glass pane windows.
Yeah.
And so I just, painted, I think it was, it involved continent of Africa and, just some other stuff, And
wow.
They were not used to having Black people,
clearly,
there. So very hostile times. And of course that was, apartheid was very active, and, going on. I didn't learn too much about that until later.
Okay.
While I was there, Yolanda King was a guest speaker. And I had the opportunity to talk to her. Her presentation was incredibly moving for me. And, after it was over, I talked to her, and then she shared information about the King Center and encouraged me to apply, which I did. And that opened up a whole new world for me because I was able to work with, Mrs. King, Yolanda, Rosa Parks, so many of those seminal civil rights figures who were still living. Andrew Young, had seminar with him. I think Martin III was mayor at that time. So it was remarkable.
Right.
And as I said, that had profound impact on me. We studied a lot about apartheid. So, Bulazi, who was chief of Zulu Nation, was visiting at that time and consulting with Mrs. King about, how to stem some of the violence that was taking place. And the chief of the Olagala Sioux also was there consulting with her about creating strategies to bring in more entrepreneurship on the reservation, how to deal with some of the social problems, alcoholism, domestic abuse that existed within the nation, and just all sorts of things. So it was a laboratory of how Kingian nonviolent philosophy could continue to have relevance and make impact on communities.
So what is an experience like that? How does it impact you as you move forward with your studies and later on in your life?
It shapes your worldview. I mean, the seeds had been planted, by my grandmother and the other elders when I was a child. And with that, it solidifies and it gives, it allows one to understand strategies for empowerment, things that worked, and the energy to move forward and, you live what you believe, so that's what that did for me.
Wow. So what was your experience like when you were attending Yale?
Oh man, it was like truly, it was in some ways like a fairy tale, in many regards. In the program, number one, just at Yale period, you have some of the brightest minds in the world that you can work with. And because of Yale's vast resources, you have access to so many things that at smaller universities you don't get. Oh my goodness, it was like just being in the most vibrant think tank that you can imagine. And so many of us, it's like, okay, how are we going to save our little corner of the world? What do we do? What strategies do we use? What type of networking do we need to get involved with? What issues? How do we prioritize our issues? And as in some ways as naive and idealistic as those things may sound, because of the resources, because of the individuals that we were exposed to, both on the campus and those who were brought onto the campus, those ideals were real. They could be realized in various degrees. It was very empowering for me.
Wow.
Very empowering for me.
That's awesome.
That's
awesome. How old were you when you became aware of civil rights activism happening in your community or in the larger world?
Oh gosh. I grew up with it. I can't tell you a time you know, because in my family, my great grandfather on my mother's side, he had been a businessman in Texas. And, you know, when he came to Oklahoma, he got involved with politics. You know, the last thing that he did was to campaign for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you know, and, you know, to get Black people involved with that political process. And my grandmother, you know, the one who could shoot, followed in his footsteps in many ways. You know, so Logan County had a Black county commissioner in 1920.
Wow.
Sylvester Reeves. Now, he didn't stay in there too long, but he got elected at the height of the lynching era. You know, the Black people who settled in Logan County, like my own people, most of them had come from the Deep South under unfavorable circumstances and settled with a certain resolve. So I grew up listening to all of these different stories about the incredible things that Black people did and were doing. You know, so with the modern civil rights movement that took place, my grandmother knew Clara Luper very well. I was just a little thing, but, you know, her name was constantly mentioned. Scipio, you know, Scipio Fisher, her name was mentioned. So there was always this heightened sense, and we were aware of what was taking place in, not just in Oklahoma, in our immediate communities or in Oklahoma, but in the United States and in the larger part of the world. The impact of colonialism, the ongoing issue of apartheid, and, you know, and making those connections to segregation, Jim Crow, and so forth. So, you know, that was what my household was like.
So you grew up around activism.
I did. You know, I did. As a child, I didn't think of it as activism. I just thought of it, that's just what people did. You know, that was just normal. You know, but of course that's not the case. Right. You know.
So what can you remember about mentionings of Clara Luper and Ada Lois Scipio Fisher?
With Clara Luper, there was tremendous pride in what she was doing in terms of desegregating public facilities, you know, in Oklahoma City. Also in the late 60s, she started Miss Black Oklahoma. And my aunt, Virginia Glover, was a second Miss Black Oklahoma. And so you had that interaction there, you know, because everything was about racial uplift. And, you know, we always, and I didn't like it as a child because I wanted to watch the cartoons, you know, but whenever her radio show came on, the whole family gathered around the table, turned on the radio, and for me, my brother was just a little bitty thing, so he was free to crawl around, but you sat and you listened, and the things, the issues that she would address. Then after the show was over, then the elders would discuss these things, in terms of Scipio Fisher. Now, one thing I remember my grandmother saying at the time is that she admitted that she didn't think she would be successful, as it was going on. And, how courageous that, girl, because when it first started, she was like 19 years old. How courageous she was. And that, the Black people in, our neck of the woods, they needed to support. So, I remember her talking about that. Of course, that was well before I was born. In my time, it was Clara Luper.
Yeah. Wow. So when you were attending Guthrie High School and Guthrie schools, can you tell me about your teachers during that time?
Oh, I had some wonderful teachers, especially in high school. Luann Ireton, she started out as my 7th grade math teacher, and then I had her in high school where she taught algebra and trig and and so forth, and she encouraged me. In so many ways, because honestly I hated math, and of course in your higher math courses you didn't have many Black people in those classes, just a few of us, and no discrimination there. She tried to uplift everyone, and her pedagogy, I think, in some ways influences my own. Another high school teacher, Carolyn Hendricks, she was my English teacher. And she pushed me. And in wonderful ways, not in hateful ways, but in, I want to say push in a hateful way. That didn't come out right. But she did. She pushed and she encouraged. She gave me her time. Both of those women gave me their time. And I don't mean just in the classroom. I mean at their house. Luann Ireton, she helped, really prepare me for my ACTs, to go to make sure, you need scholarships here. So, and you're lazy with your math, which I was. And with Carolyn Hendricks, she exposed all of her students to what the imagination can unlock, if only it is unlocked. And she tried to do that with all of her students. And with me, she encouraged my writing. She felt that I was a good writer and stuff. But I could, I was not a good speller. Thank God for spell check on the computer. But she encouraged those things. You know, I did not encounter much discrimination, you know, in my educational secondary, pre-secondary educational career. You know, did not.
So when you talk about Miss Ireton and how she influenced your pedagogy, what do you mean by that?
I think in terms of how she could inspire. And also in watching her reach out to other students who struggled. You know, I have seen and experienced in other classes in high school teachers who were only interested in helping the brightest. Okay. And with Ireton and Hendricks too, they worked doubly hard to help to empower those students who struggled, you know. And one would think in education that that would be the normal thing, but no. It does not have to be that way. So, you know, in terms of how I work with students, and we deal with a lot of first generation, those lessons resonate deeply with me.
Can you kind of talk about, did you experience any tensions as Oklahoma began to roll out desegregation? I know that you said Guthrie was kind of a little bit different in that it was already kind of integrated to begin with.
Well, no, I don't.
Like the schools?
Yeah, for me with when I started. I'll share a little story.
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm taking you down a rabbit hole.
No.
But it was a memory. Second grade. And at that time, I think Guthrie's population may have been 35 to 40% black still. Meaning you had it was heavily black. And I remember, you know, with the black students, we all of us, every black student in that school, we went to the end of the playground, which was a large area, and then we all linked hands. Hey, get out of my way. Just got back from the USA. You don't get out of my way, I'm gonna kick you out of my way. We pushed everybody else off of the playground.
Wow.
And I say that because even though we're like, little second graders, right? There was an awareness of, what Black people were doing in this country towards trying to make things more equitable. And, and we shouldn't have done anything like that. It was very radical. But it was a sense, I think, of pride and not having to be second class. And in spite of the fact that, because integration was still new, and I was the youngest of my cohort. So most of my classmates, all of my classmates actually, were older than me. you know, and, you know, which makes me question, you know, those who had siblings who did experience, you know, an educational experience under segregation, you know. So there was that power there.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow. Second grader refuting second class citizenship.
I know, and it's like where, and I often ask myself whenever I think about that every now and then, why did we do that? Where did those ideas come from? And they had to come from our households.
Yeah.
You know? And no one stopped us.
Really?
Teachers didn't freak out. We made it. It was our little march. We made it all the way to the front.
March on the playground.
That's
so cute.
I know. I was like,
So what's your experience like being, so when you finished Yale with your PhD, did you go into becoming an educator immediately? Like what took place after your PhD?
Well, I had to take a medical leave after I finished my generals. I had onset of lupus, and it hit me very hard. So I had to come home. And that's how I ended up in Oklahoma, back in Oklahoma. I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. From high school, I knew that I wanted to be a college professor and stuff. But it took years for me to get that diagnosis. It was all, well, we know you have an autoimmune disease. We're just not sure. And, you know, really that was a personal confrontation with racism that was different in some ways, more profound than even the things that I had seen growing up. Because I went for years without treatment. And of course, my body continued to deteriorate. So it took me years to climb my way out of that, the physical state that I was in and the mental state, the depression, because I was one of those people who burnt the candle at both ends. I was productive. And, you know, so making the adjustment to the disease, once I finally got a diagnosis and got some treatment, it was only after that then I could then focus back on my dissertation. You know, while I was working on my dissertation here, I adjuncted OSU. You know, I thought, okay, I'll put my toe out there. And then taught at OU, you know, for some years before coming here. So, you know, I didn't finish my dissertation until 2006, you know, which it should have been finished much earlier on the track that I was on. But the point to it in coming to Oklahoma, that changed the trajectory of my life and made me rethink about how I could use my experiences, my expertise to empower students here, you know, to in my own tiny way to help students who may not have had the type of education or, that I was blessed to have. So I take pride in that. I don't make as much as I would if I had been able to stay on the East Coast. It would have been a whole different trajectory. But I think, given the brain drain that Oklahoma and a lot of southern states have, I think it's important to be able to give back and to empower and build upon the things that I was given here.
So what were your experiences like teaching at OSU, OU, and now USAO? What have your experiences been like being an educator back here in the state?
That's a difficult question in some ways because I've been teaching for 20 years.
Okay.
And so over that length of time, I taught students before No Child Left Behind. And of course since that time, and I've been able to see how student performance has changed drastically. When I first started teaching, students would come in with a certain level of skills that were expected. And I think No Child Left Behind has done a disservice to so many of America's young people, because the things that I normally expected, let's say at OSU, student athletes, all students, it didn't matter. They came in with a certain level of tools and work ethic, and so I'm like, yeah, this is cool, right? Yeah. When I started teaching at OU, I saw that kind of decline. And I saw some of the problems that educators face. When you deal with different agendas that are not educationally centered.
Right.
And that's all I can say about that. Teaching here, though, in some ways was an eye-opener, because a lot of our students come from little tiny towns that I've never heard of. And I had students tell me stories. One story was about their school. They had junior high and high school students all in one room. I'm like, get out. I said, that's like Little House on the Prairie. The student shared that with me because she had no idea. It was a writing class that I was teaching. Had never heard of the term topic sentence, thesis, and just basic things that you should have been taught a long time ago, and throughout one's educational career before you ever get to college. And so I had to change how I taught because more and more students did not have the skills. And so, my little mission has been to, prepare them for the real world, because if you engage in any professional activity, whether you're a cop or a social worker or whatever, you have to write. You know, and you need to be able to think critically, you know, rather than someone tells you something, okay, and you don't question, which was another thing that I was not used to. So I think, you know, my experiences here have been rewarding in the sense that I can truly convey tools and insights that can help these students succeed in the real world. That's my hope anyway.
Yeah.
You know, what I try to do.
So lastly, when we talk about Brown, desegregating schools, things like that, what are your thoughts about how the effectiveness of Brown?
Okay. Well, on the one hand, you have the precedent, the legal precedent that undermined Plessy, which that's a good thing. But what people do not necessarily realize is that there's a distinction between desegregation and integration. And one of the issues that occurred through integration is what happened to Black teachers and Black schools. When you look back on someone like Clara Luper, particularly, her effectiveness in so many respects is almost paradoxical and ironic, I think, occurred because of segregation. Because those schools could serve as incubators for conveying life skills, not just you need to learn so much in terms of history and develop certain math skills and blah, 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 but how to live meaningfully, how to be a citizen, how to aspire to your best. And in those sites of incubation, Black people thrived, you know. And, you know, while I am not advocating segregation, don't get me wrong, there's certain areas, just like Black business, integration decimated Black business. It also decimated the foundations that had been built for Black education. So I think in certain regards, Brown was bittersweet. Because it opened the door for so many opportunities. To remove that legal glass ceiling that Plessy installed. But at the same time, I raised the question on to what extent did it erode Black community?
Yeah. Or could you even say Black advancement?
Well, you could, but I think you would have to define the term advancement.
Okay.
You know, because if we look at advancement in terms of the paradigm established by the dominant culture, advancement is evaluated in terms of the material trappings the advancement that you as an individual achieve. It is not based on a collective idea. So on an individual basis, yeah, it had worked. In terms of the collective, that's a question.
Yeah.
You know.
In my classes, when we talk about desegregation and Brown, I'm always bringing up the fact that I feel like, on one hand, like you said, Plessy was meant to instill inferiority, second-class citizenship, legally. And so when we talk about the segregation nostalgia, it's important to understand that legally Black people were supposed to be second-class citizens. So for Brown, I appreciate what that did, taking away that legal recourse. But I'll always go back to the fact that I feel like it did hinder advancement of Black people on a collective basis, like you're saying, because when we think of communities, when we think of business, when we think of schools and the effectiveness of schools and how the schools propelled Blacks into the real world on a successful, I think it stopped because we lost our teachers, we lost our schools, and people would always look at me crazy, but it always just felt like that to me. And I couldn't, when I was early in my PhD, I had a hard time of articulating it. It was just an idea of the communities were gone, the businesses were gone. But now that I'm doing the research and talking to folks, it seems like that's becoming nuanced with everyone. Like everyone says the same thing. Like, yes, we appreciate the legality of removing the legality of our inferior status, but it's bittersweet because we lost a lot with that we won't be able to get back.
No. You know, if you think about, you know, the Black film industry, that was eviscerated. I mean, there's so many industries that were eviscerated. Education, how many, if we look at the statistics now, what percentage of teachers, public school teachers in Oklahoma are African American?
Yeah.
It's small.
Yeah. Yet, if you look at the percentage of African American students.
Well, the percentage of African American students is higher, you know, but we can say the same thing across people of color. Percentage of Hispanic teachers, of Native American teachers, you know, and so we see that just in terms of that alone, that integration decimated the careers of teaching professionals who contributed much to education, much less schools and this, that, and so forth. And that's the deal. But, you know, I mean, you can't hang that shingle on integration alone, because I think Jim Crow was most successful in the way that it inculcated this idea of Black inferiority to Blacks, or at the very least, that white is better. You know, otherwise you would still have your Black businesses and different things like that in Glee, because Black people could control that. You can't control a school system and stuff, but, you know, but we abandon. You know, and I think, and that's still an ongoing issue. To what extent have we, or do we continue to internalize these issues of inferiority? You know, that's why I'm so excited about what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. I will say, I I think that it's so important, the questions that you raise, because we need to think about that. We need to rethink how we understand the African American community.
Yeah.
To bring it into the 21st century and to recapture, or not recover, histories that are lost, so we have a better sense of who we are.
Right. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
I don't know if I helped you at all.
You helped tremendously.